They were erased from the maps, scrubbed from the textbooks, and locked away where no camera could find them. But the ground remembers. The stone remembers. And now, so do the drones. What you are about to witness has no comfortable explanation, only a pattern too consistent, too global, and too ancient to ignore. Welcome to Splinters of Time.
There is a pattern running through accounts that emerge from completely separate places. And that pattern is precisely what makes this so difficult to wave away with a simple explanation. People on different continents, with no access to each other's stories, describe the same behaviors, the same proportions, the same upright posture, and the same sensation. The feeling that the creature knew it was being watched. A hiker crossing a mountain saw at the top of a ridge an elder of impossible stature, long white hair, a dark robe, and at the tip of his staff a blue light, pulsing. The moment the camera was raised, the figure noticed. It turned, and within seconds it was gone. Not walked away, gone. In another recording, tourists navigating a river in Colorado noticed an enormous silhouette standing still among the tree trunks along the bank, completely motionless, watching the boat pass. Its upright posture, its width, its height rising above the brush made one thing clear. This was not a common animal. It was not a human being. It stood long enough to be filmed, and then it left, without hurry, like something that knew the land belonged to it. In Alberta, Canada, a figure crossed a hillside between the trees with a stride far too wide for any human being. It never looked back. It never hesitated. In Wyoming, a hiker found handprints carved into rock. Proportionally, they would belong to a being more than 13 feet tall. In Kandahar, Afghanistan, a cave long known for its ancient local stories was explored on camera. The man recording saw a tall, thin figure with a long beard emerge from the darkness and stare directly at him before he retreated. In a snow-covered forest in China, a woman spotted between the trees a dark and motionless form she could not identify as any animal she had ever seen. In a remote valley in Russia, a photographer captured on the horizon of a distant mountain an isolated dark figure standing alone, with no visible path of access beneath it. In a village in Brazil, residents watched a massive figure at the top of a hill stand perfectly still for several minutes and then vanish into the tree line. Each of these accounts came from people who had almost certainly never heard of each other. Different languages, opposite time zones, and yet each describes essentially the same thing. A figure far too large for the space it occupied, moving with the calm of something that has never needed to hide, as though the land has belonged to it for a very long time. In Lovelock, Nevada, in 1911, miners unearthed more than 40 human skeletons during an excavation. Several of them stood between 7 and 8 feet tall. Beside the bones were sandals and clothing of wildly disproportionate size. Some of the skulls still had reddish hair intact. That last part is not an anonymous video on the internet. It is documented in archaeological records from the early 20th century, and the mystery remains. No official resolution, no accepted explanation. The artifacts were catalogued. Researchers documented them. And to this day, there is no consolidated explanation for the presence of skeletons with those proportions, in that location, in that quantity. The evidence was gathered, filed, and quietly set aside. Some of these recordings go far beyond distant silhouettes. One night, a man was driving through a forest when his headlights illuminated something crouched at the edge of the road. A pale, thin creature with limbs disproportionately long. It stood up, it looked at the car, and it walked directly toward the vehicle. There was no room to maneuver. The figure passed alongside the car and disappeared into the darkness. The man left down that same road at full speed and never returned. In Alaska, a tourist filming a snowstorm from a cable car noticed something in the frame. An enormous figure was moving against the blizzard with steady, even steps, as though the storm did not exist. When the image was brought closer, the form became more defined. Bipedal. Massive. The tourist, in his own words, described it as a werewolf of gigantic proportions. He acknowledged out loud that he was lucky to be in the air at that moment. On Navajo land, a drone captured a dark creature lying on the rocks. When it realized it was being observed, it stood and ran at a speed that made no sense for its size. The Navajo Nation has carried stories of strange beings inhabiting those lands for centuries. Is this recording connected to that tradition? No official answer exists. In 1992, someone with a handheld camera filmed a remote valley in a location no one has ever been able to identify. The footage shows a being approximately 30 feet tall, walking slowly, dragging a thick rope across the ground. The surrounding environment, the trees, the rocks, the ridgelines, all make the scale impossible to dismiss. There is no trick of perspective that explains what is on screen. There is no edit cut that justifies the movement. Nobody knows who filmed it. Nobody knows what country it was recorded in. And in more than 3 decades, not a single person has been able to prove the footage is fake. That video exists. It is circulating right now. And it is just one of dozens of recordings that have surfaced over the past several decades, from different angles, different countries, different weather conditions, captured on everything from old analog cameras to high-resolution drones. Every single one of them points in the same uncomfortable direction. There is something out there that should not exist, according to everything we have ever been taught about the world we inhabit. But what exactly is it? Where does it come from? And why, as more cameras spread across the planet, do more recordings appear instead of fewer? Another pattern that surfaces repeatedly is the question of impossible access. On an unreachable cliff face, filmed from a distance, a large dark figure moved along the edges of a narrow cave opening in the rock wall, moving as though searching for a way out. There was no trail below, no lateral exit, no logical path by which something of that size could have arrived there. The question the video left unanswered was not what is that? The question was, how did it get there? In a cave in the Peruvian Andes, a trail camera captured a creature with a body structure different from the human standard, entering the interior of the rock. The description aligned with local accounts of a being called Gold Atman, present in regional stories for generations. Every week that passes, new recordings emerge. From forests, mountains, deserts, rivers, from people who do not know each other, in countries with no connection between them. All describing the same silhouettes, the same behaviors, the same sensation of standing before something that existed long before us and continues to exist at the edges of the world we believe we understand. The most recent recording came from a forest in California. A tall female figure, far beyond human proportions, moving slowly toward the tree line. The person who filmed it said it felt as though she had been hiding for years, but that something had changed. What changed? And where will she appear next? Long before the first archaeologist ever lifted a shovel, the answer was already written down. The Book of Enoch is one of the oldest religious texts ever discovered, believed to date back more than 2,000 years. It describes in precise and unsettling detail a race of giants born from the union of fallen angels, beings the text calls the Watchers, and human women. The offspring were called the Nephilim. They were not metaphorical. The text describes them as physical beings of enormous size, consuming resources beyond what the earth could provide, turning on humans and on each other with violence that could not be contained. According to the Book of Enoch, it was their presence on earth that made the Great Flood not just inevitable, but necessary. A reset, an erasure of what had gone wrong. The Book of Enoch was considered sacred scripture by early Jewish and Christian communities. It is quoted directly in the New Testament, in the letter of Jude. It was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, meaning it was preserved and studied by the same communities that preserved the rest of the biblical canon. And then, in the 4th century, it was removed. Church councils debated its legitimacy and ultimately excluded it from official scripture. The reasons given were theological. But the text survived anyway, preserved in Ethiopia, in fragments across the ancient world, and eventually rediscovered in full in the 18th century. Whatever the early church wanted to distance itself from, it did not succeed in burying it entirely. The Genesis passage that the Book of Enoch elaborates on is still in the Bible today. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. It reads, "The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." 2 verses, no further explanation. As though whoever compiled the final text decided that was all the world needed to know. What makes the giant question impossible to dismiss as a single cultural myth is the fact that no single culture owns it. Every major civilization in human history, separated by oceans, by centuries, by language, by religion, independently recorded the same memory. Beings far larger than us, who existed before us, who shaped the world we inherited. The Sumerians, whose civilization is among the oldest on record, described the Anunnaki as godlike beings of immense stature who descended from the sky and played a direct role in the formation of early human society. Sumerian tablets describe them in physical terms: tall, powerful, luminous, arriving from elsewhere, and establishing order where there was none. The word Anunnaki translates roughly as those who came from heaven to earth. They were not worshipped as abstract forces. They were described as beings with bodies, with needs, with intentions, and with a size and presence that placed them categorically apart from ordinary humans. The ancient Greeks built their entire cosmology around a war between 2 generations of giants. The Titans were the first rulers of the cosmos, beings of enormous power and physical scale who preceded the Olympian gods. Cronus, Hyperion, Atlas, Prometheus, these were not small figures. They were described as so vast that when they fell, their bodies became mountains, their blood became rivers, their bones became the foundations of the earth itself. The war between the Titans and the Olympians, known as the Titanomachy, lasted 10 years and reshaped the physical world. Greek mythology did not treat giants as monsters to be feared from a distance. It treated them as the previous occupants of a world that had been taken from them. The Norse tradition goes further still. The Jotun, often translated as giants or frost giants, were not simply large humans. They were a separate category of being entirely older than the gods themselves, inhabiting a realm called Jotunheim that existed alongside but apart from the human world. In Norse cosmology, the entire physical universe was constructed from the body of a primordial giant named Ymir. His flesh became the earth, his blood became the seas, his bones became the mountains, his skull became the sky. The Norse did not merely record giants as historical figures. They believed the physical world itself was the remains of one. In Hindu scripture, the Daityas were a race of giants and demons born of the goddess Diti, who waged a series of cosmic wars against the Devas, the gods of the Hindu pantheon. These were not minor mythological footnotes. The wars between the Daityas and the Devas are central to some of the most important texts in Hindu tradition, including the Mahabharata and the Puranas. The Daityas were described as beings of extraordinary physical size and strength, capable of challenging the gods themselves, shaking the foundations of heaven, and forcing the divine order to repeatedly reorganize itself in response to their power. These traditions did not borrow from each other. The Sumerians did not read Norse mythology. The Greeks did not have access to Hindu scripture. the peoples of the ancient Americas did not correspond with the civilizations of the Middle East, and yet the same figure appears in all of them: large, ancient, powerful, present before humanity as we know it, and in almost every tradition eventually gone, defeated, buried, or driven underground, hidden somewhere beneath the world we walk on every day. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, American newspapers published hundreds of reports documenting the discovery of giant human skeletal remains across the continent. These were not fringe publications or sensationalist tabloids. They were local and regional papers of record, reporting on findings made by farmers, miners, and archaeologists during a period of rapid westward expansion when the American land was being broken open for the first time on an industrial scale. The reports describe skeletons found in burial mounds across Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, West Virginia, and Tennessee. Heights recorded range from 7 feet to over 11 feet. Skulls described as double the size of a normal human head. Extra rows of teeth, skeletal proportions that did not match any known human population. Many of the remains were found alongside artifacts, tools, jewelry, and burial goods that suggested the individuals had been part of organized societies. They were not anomalies buried alone. They were members of communities. The Smithsonian Institution, founded in 1846 and tasked with the collection and preservation of American archaeological material, received many of these findings. Researchers and historians who have investigated the paper trail report that the institution acknowledged receiving the remains in correspondence and internal records, and that the bones subsequently disappeared from any accessible archive. Freedom of Information requests filed in more recent decades have returned no records of the remains in question. The Smithsonian's official position is that no such remains exist in their collection. In 2014, a satirical news website published a fabricated story claiming the Smithsonian had officially admitted to destroying giant skeletons. That story spread widely and was debunked as fiction. But the debunking of a fabricated confession does not explain the original newspaper reports, the correspondence records, or the absence of the physical evidence that multiple sources documented as having been collected. The fake story became the reason to dismiss the real question, and the real question has never been answered. In 1928, Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello discovered a massive burial site on the Paracas Peninsula in southern Peru. Among the remains were more than 300 skulls, with a characteristic that set them apart from any normal human anatomy. They were elongated. Not in the way that ritual head binding produces elongation, where the skull is compressed and reshaped while remaining the same overall volume, but in a way that increased the total cranial capacity significantly beyond normal human range. Some of the Paracas skulls have a cranial volume estimated at 60% larger than an average human skull. Binding cannot create additional volume. It can only redistribute existing volume. The physical differences go beyond shape. The Paracas skulls have only one parietal plate, where normal human skulls have two. The sagittal suture, the seam running along the top of the skull, is either absent or structured differently. These are not variations within the range of human anatomical diversity. They are structural differences at a fundamental level. In 2018, a DNA analysis was conducted on samples taken from several of the Paracas skulls. The results were described by the researcher conducting the study as representing mitochondrial DNA, with mutations unknown in any human, primate, or animal known so far. The analysis has not been peer-reviewed or officially published in an academic journal, and mainstream science has not accepted its conclusions. But the physical anomalies of the skulls themselves remain unresolved. No official explanation accounts for the structural differences in a way that satisfies the anatomical record. The Paracas culture that produced these burials is estimated to have existed between approximately 800 before the Common Era and 100 of the Common Era. They left behind some of the most sophisticated textiles ever discovered in the ancient world, woven with a complexity that still impresses modern textile experts. They were not a primitive people. They were an advanced one, and whoever among them possessed those skulls occupied a position that set them apart from the rest. In the Bekaa Valley of modern Lebanon, the ruins of the ancient city of Baalbek contain a construction achievement that has not been satisfactorily explained in centuries of scholarly attention. The Temple of Jupiter, built during the Roman period on foundations that predate Roman construction by an unknown number of centuries, sits on a platform of stone blocks of a scale that defies ordinary explanation. The largest of these blocks, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. It is approximately 64 feet long, 14 feet high, and 11 feet wide. It has never been moved from the quarry where it was cut. A second block nearby, known as the Stone of the South, is even larger, estimated at over 1,600 tons, and was only discovered in the early 2000s when excavation work revealed it still partially buried. These are not boulders incorporated into a structure. They are precision-cut megalithic blocks, shaped with flat faces and right angles, intended to be placed as part of a deliberate architectural plan. The largest crane in operation in the world today has a lifting capacity of approximately 3,000 tons under ideal conditions, which means lifting the Stone of the Pregnant Woman is theoretically within the range of the most powerful modern machinery, but only barely, and only with the kind of infrastructure that did not exist in the ancient world. Moving it across uneven terrain to a precise position in a foundation wall is a different problem entirely. Mainstream archaeology attributes the construction of the Baalbek platform to Roman engineers, who were undeniably among the most sophisticated builders of the ancient world. But Roman records make no mention of how these blocks were moved. No construction documents survive. No engineering accounts describe the process. And the Roman structures built on top of the platform, impressive as they are, do not match the scale of the foundation stones beneath them. The platform appears to have been built by someone else, for a purpose that the Romans then built over, without fully understanding what they were building on. The question of who quarried, transported, and placed blocks of that weight, with that precision, before the development of modern machinery, does not have an accepted answer. Some researchers argue for lost technologies. Others argue for a level of organized human labor so vast it strains credulity. And some argue that the scale of the work suggests the involvement of beings for whom that scale was simply not remarkable. Robert Wadlow was born in Alton, Illinois in 1918. By the time of his death in 1940, at the age of 22, he stood 8 feet 11.1 inches tall and weighed 490 pounds. He is the tallest human being in verified recorded history. He was still growing at the time of his death. Wadlow's condition was caused by hyperplasia of the pituitary gland, which produced abnormally high levels of growth hormone throughout his life without cessation. He required leg braces to walk and had limited sensation in his feet. The brace that caused the infection that ultimately killed him went unnoticed because he could not feel it. His body was the result of a single gland producing too much of a single hormone. There was no mystery to his height in medical terms. It was a documented physiological condition with a clear mechanism. What Wadlow demonstrates is the outer boundary of what human biology can produce under extreme pathological conditions. He was nearly 9 feet tall, and he could barely walk unassisted. The structural demands placed on the human skeleton, the cardiovascular system, and the musculature by that level of height are immense. At 9 feet, the body is already failing under its own weight. The skeletal remains documented at Lovelock, the figures described in the Book of Enoch, the beings recorded across world mythology. These are not 9-foot individuals struggling to stand. They are described as mobile, powerful, coordinated, and long-lived. Whatever they were, if they were physical beings at all, they were not simply humans with overactive pituitary glands. The biology required to support that level of size and function, if it existed, has never been found in any known species. Which means either the accounts are wrong, or the biology is something we have not yet discovered, or something we have stopped looking for. If what you just witnessed stayed with you, then you already know what to do. Leave a like, subscribe to Splinters of Time, and join the conversation in the comments below. Every share, every click, every new subscriber keeps this kind of content alive. Until the next fragment of history finds its way to you, take care of yourselves. We will see you soon.